Oh, actually, that's pretty good lighting right there. I think it is. What do y'all think? Welcome to another edition of the Willy Bragg Show. I am your host, Willy Bragg. I think that might do the trick. It's my best side, I think. Maybe. Let me know if y'all think this is my good side with the lighting and all of that. So, I don't need to look so pale. That's the only thing. If I could just, that might work. We're going with that. I think the sweet spot. There we go. All right. I think I got the lighting correct now. Okay. My name is Willy Bragg. Welcome to another edition of the Willy Bragg Show. And I want to discuss the topic of populism and what basically right-wing populism means to me, because I think that sometimes in this country, we have it so, unfortunately, because of our two-party system, that the narrative usually focuses in one direction, and once it's focused a certain way, even if it's contrary to actual opinion, actual fact, that's what people accept. And I like to go and try to counter such narratives right there. So, well, I'm going to start by saying that basically the difference between what I will call a left-wing populism and, difference between what I would call a left-wing populism and a right-wing populism comes down to in terms of what I would call economics, especially here in the USA. When leftist populism is at bay and true to their core values, such as a person leading these movements want to take on greed, cruelty, injustice of these corporations, that's when they're at their best. And when you make a convincing argument, people realize they're fighting for us. When they're fighting for things like a wage increase, fighting for things like expanding union rights, fighting for universal health care, and basically fighting for all people, regardless if they're elected as a Democrat. And there's not that many Democrats. In fact, I'm going to argue that the squad failed us, but we're going with that premise. Let's say, in theory, that the squad were doing what they were supposed to do, fighting for us. Even if they're failing to do it, the fact that they fought should have meant something. And they're not doing that. That's another issue I have with them. But whether they're elected or they work as activists, if they're seen fighting against outsourcing and fighting against right to work laws and at will employment, fighting to keep our basic entitlements like Social Security and Medicare and even expanding it, that's an example of left-wing populism right there. And when it comes to right-wing populism, in terms of economics, again, it's the culture war garbage when they do it. Whether we're talking about whether they're running as Republicans or they're running as an independent conservative or they're running as a Constitution Party or something of that nature, they're pissed that the LGBTQ friendly companies. That's what it usually comes down to, or recognition of Martin Luther King Day or something like that, or they'll get mad at Black Lives Matter or something like that being plastered on their wall or something at some company or anything else that's perceived as a liberal virtue signaling. They'll pearl clutch at Nike for calling what's his name? The football player, Colin something with a K. I forgot his name. Gosh, they'll go and they'll get angry at somebody for kneeling during the American anthem, or they'll get mad at Starbucks over somebody saying Happy Holidays, or get mad at rainbows at Target, and even after a decade, when progressives were mad at Chick-fil-A for their opposition to same-sex marriage, now they're kind of backtracking or have a new approach. All of a sudden, Chick-fil-A is now woke. what's the other one? The Budweiser, Bud Light, the Dylan Mulvaney, and anybody. I still can't get over people getting angry over her. I really can't. This is what they consider woke, and they don't get concerned or pissed off over things like anti-union crackdowns, lowering wages, or outsourcing. No, they don't get mad at that. They don't. They get mad at stupid social issues, culture war stuff. So they're usually fine with the cruelty that comes along with crony capitalism today, corporatism. But they also want corporations to be authoritarian and socially conservative too. In other words, to do political correctness, but in a right-wing spin or a right-wing way. And having that said, I mean, and I'm not saying that every conservative or every right of center person thinks this way. I want to make that clear, because we're all complex creatures, regardless of whatever side of the fence we're on politically. We're all complex creatures. We all have our little niches and our differences on every issue, what have you. I don't want to go and sound like I'm scapegoating, but I am overall kind of angry at the right for the way that they have kind of done that and act like, oh, well, they're the populists. No, they're not. And as I said, I think that there is a right-wing variation of wokeness, a right-wing variation of political correctness, and a right-wing variation of cancel culture. And there is such a thing as those things. And when I hear people say, I never hear the right talk about imposing cancel culture, they invented it. I promise you, they invented it. So while I'm critical of the so-called right-wing populism everywhere, that makes it uglier in America, it's what it is that makes America more ugly, even than their foreign counterparts. Because at least with the populism of the right in other countries, and I would never join any right-wing movement anywhere, but at least in other countries, they're not as antagonistic toward universal health care if they already have a universal health care system as a general rule. They're usually not too antagonistic toward the safety net to the level that they are here in the United States. And they're usually not as anti-union as they are in the United States. I mean, they are anti-union more than the rest of the population, even the center right. They're more anti-safety net, but usually it comes in the guise of, the immigration, we got to go close to the borders or something like that. That's how they operate in those other countries in that regard. But they are horrible capitalists still at the end of the day. And so I'm just going to go and I want to share my thoughts about that. And let's go back to basic American politics, because that's where we need to start. Because let's start and begin at the beginning. That's where we have to begin. I'm not going to say that this is absolutely where it all started and everything was well prior. That is not what I'm saying. But in my lifetime, I would say that the modern problem that exists was when the FDR New Deal consensus ended and the Reagan Revolution began. And we are still suffering under the effects of the Reagan Revolution. Now, by today's standard, Ronald Reagan would be considered a rhino Republican, as harsh as it is. He basically, Barry Goldwater prior to Ronald Reagan, and Ronald Reagan birthed this nonsense. But I don't think that especially Barry Goldwater didn't want it to go this far as it did. And Reagan probably didn't either, but he was still closer to the ugly side of contemporary conservatism than, let's say, Barry Goldwater, who was basically a proto-libertarian. With regard to Ronald Reagan, he basically came there with his intention of destroying the New Deal consensus. And he did. He did. I would argue that the three countries that experimented with this kind of what we call the modern age of neoliberalism started in 1973, really, when the U.S. it was the CIA assisted a right wing in Chile to overthrow the Allende's government. And when that happened, when the Allende's government was toppled and Pinochet came in, and by the way, fuck Augusto Pinochet. and fuck him. Fuck Augusto Pinochet, by the way. Some people want to defend him. Fuck him. Anyway, getting back to what I was saying. The thing about Pinochet is that Pinochet he was the one that started this nonsense of neoliberalism. His country was like an experiment for this nonsense. And what I mean by that is that basically the country basically privatized as much as could be privatized as any society could. I mean, the services were slashed, unions were all pretty much banned. Everything was, privatized. And, unlike what some anarcho-capitalists would tell you that, freedom exists when you have an absolute free market. Yeehaw! And that's not the case. That is not the case. Chile was proof of that. It was basically, it wasn't Hitler's Nazi Germany. It may not have been Mussolini's Italy, but it was probably closer to Mussolini's Italy. Maybe not as authoritarian as Mussolini's Italy, but it certainly was authoritarian. It was certainly authoritarianly socially conservative, and it was hardcore anarcho-capitalist when it came to the economics. And it was very brutal to dissidents, left-wing dissidents in particular. And the methods of execution included throwing people off helicopters. That was Pinochet. Now, two countries after Pinochet's Chile experimented with neoliberalism, and they were both democracies that got corrupted. Really, not that they weren't corrupted previously, but they were corrupted by the time these two morons came along. And in Great Britain in 1979, Margaret Thatcher came along. I will argue that the Thatcher Revolution was never necessary for Great Britain. The economic sluggish was around the world, had an energy crisis, and that's what happened throughout the world. It's just the simple explanation. I don't even blame, in the 1970s, I don't even blame Nixon or Ford or Carter for problems of the 1970s. It was the oil embargo, things of that nature. It caused a sluggish economy around the world in a lot of places. And that's what it came down to. So Ronald Reagan came along in 1980, and he basically tried raising, to try to do away with Social Security, but he ended up raising it to the age of 67. And basically it was a big assault on the welfare system and the safety net that we had in this country. And the unions were starting to decline due to what is called deindustrialization. Under neoliberalism, they believe in free trade. And that, they don't care what happened to American workers. And Ronald Reagan, there's a lot of people who work in an assembly line and, whatever. They'll be like, well, Ronald Reagan was really for the American workers. He was not for the American workers. Ronald Reagan's government did a lot of human rights abuses abroad. Never forget this. Never forget this. Never forget this. There was a lot of human rights abuses. He tolerated the apartheid government in South Africa, things like that. He was trading arms for hostages with Iran, to go and fund right-wing forces in Central America. So Ronald, and we had a drug epidemic in this country because of what happened with the United States in partnership with Manuel Noriega. We know that's exactly why George Herbert Walker Bush invaded it during the Christmas of 1989. So there was a lot of evil that was going on, by the Reagan administration. You want to know why we have a militarized police force today? You want to know why we have surveillance, even though the surveillance was very primitive? You know what kind of laid foundation for that? A lot of the Reagans tough on the drug war and the law and order bullshit. People like Ed Meese that ran he was the attorney general, people like that. So, the United States basically moved away from the New Deal, and it became, like a frog in a pot of boiling water. It starts off warm, and you don't notice it. When it boils, the frog doesn't notice it. Then, damn, the frog dies. And that's what happened. We Americans are the frog, and Ronald Reagan put us in the boiling water. It was warm at first, a little, and then we didn't notice it little by little by little by little. We're in the mess that we're in. We can't have nice things today because of this motherfucker. I resent Ronald Reagan a great deal. So he was really the beginning of the modern ugly side of neoliberalism, this gilded age that we live under right now. I'm not going to say he reinvented it, but those other movements, other events that contributed to it. But Ronald Reagan was basically he was the catalyst that sparked it initially. So does that mean that when Democrats are in power, that things are better? Absolutely not. Bill Clinton made damn sure that the Democratic Party was Reaganized in the 1990s. When he took over the Democratic Leadership Council in 1989, and the Democratic Leadership Council basically shoved the Democratic Party down the toilet. It moved away from working with unions. It was not that the Democratic Party was a labor party, but it operated as one by default, but it wasn't one. It was never one. But we moved even further away from it under Bill Clinton in the 1990s. And so triangulation and being a centrist was basically a badge of honor for many Democrats. I used to hear it all the time. Well, I'm a centrist. Oh, I'm not a liberal. I'm not a liberal. I'm not a liberal either. I'm not a liberal either because you motherfuckers who deny you're liberals are the ones you're a bunch of cowards. You're afraid of the L word. And I was like, well, no, y'all can have that L word now because that's not me either. I'm a socialist. I remember what I went through on a personal experience with the college Democrats, and I was like the unhinged to them. I was like an unhinged tanky. So anyway, Bill Clinton basically continued this bullshit, and I have absolute contempt for Bill and Hillary Clinton. Strangely enough, I became a socialist because of Bill and Hillary Clinton. Not because they were one, like Rush Limbaugh said in the 1990s, but I became a socialist because, in spite of Bill Clinton, because Bill Clinton made me see what bullshit that the Democratic Party has become. And I went more radical because of Bill Clinton. So there you have it. Because I didn't want to be anything like a Bill and Hillary Clinton Democrat. They are the problem. They are the problems. So let's go to this next phase, and that's George W. Bush. After Bill Clinton, George W. Bush became president, and just basically continued the Reagan Revolution and all of that. Now, I get a little irritated when I run across some independent conservatives today. They'll be like, well, I didn't like Bush either. He was not really a conservative. What are you talking about? When Newt Gingrich cucked Bill Clinton into welfare reform and the Telecommunications Act and things of that nature, he also cucked Bill Clinton into getting rid of Glass-Steagall, which meant that Wall Street could be regulated, and they regulated the fuck out of deregulated the fuck out of Wall Street. And it went on steroids under George W. Bush. And George W. Bush had a score to settle with Saddam Hussein because of the situation in 1990 with Operation Desert Shield, Desert Storm, the first Gulf War. He was looking for an excuse. I'm not a 9/11 truther. I don't believe that was they did that with that intention, because I don't even think that on that one I wouldn't even think that a George Bush would be that evil. So but it still happened. It would have happened under anybody's watch. And so what happened in as a result of 9/11, I can guarantee you they were glad it happened, because it was like you got the Patriot Act that was slapped down into law. Now we are being monitorized all over the country today. And the Patriot Act was the very beginning. All these right wingers last year, and they were correct to criticize Biden over trying to create a disinformation governance board, and fuck this administration for doing that, by the way, and what's her name? Nina Yankowicz. Fuck her for what she did. She blocked me. On Twitter. To try to create this ministry of truth. None of this could have been possible had it not been for people like George W. Bush with the Department of Homeland Security and basically the Patriot Act and basically spying on American people and torturing and things of that nature. And, was he really for the troops? Because I hear people who tell me, you want universal health care? You can see how the VA hospital turned out. Well, let me tell you about that VA hospital situation. The Bush administration and the Republicans in Congress came up with these so-called reforms, what they call means testing. And usually means testing is basically an expensive way to show to the American public that we're fiscally responsible while doing nothing about a problem that may exist, and then harming the unfortunate, the less fortunate who needs these programs in the process. And also it creates resentment along class lines and usually along race lines, because when you means test a program that's universal, like Social Security, like Medicare, like the VA hospital, you know what happens? The Veterans Administration, you know what happens? When you go and means test it, you turn it into a welfare program. And when you turn it into a welfare program, Americans have a strange way of taking a race-neutral program like welfare and somehow painting it with a black or brown face on it. And they're like, oh, freeloaders. When people who are black and brown are no more hooked on public assistance anymore than white people are. But that's what they do. It's meant to divide. So it's a dog whistle. Now, when I hear conservatives say, he was too moderate. He was too moderate. He was too right-wing. He fed into the culture war. And Karens like Ellen DeGeneres, who was at a baseball game hanging out with George W. Bush a couple of years ago while Orange Man Trump was president. The bitch needs to realize that she could not get married because of people like George W. Bush, who sat there and basically enabled the Christian right. The culture war. I forgot to put up the video, but if you remember the movie Jesus Camp with the cardboard of Jesus at some church and some lady is speaking in tongues and the kids are just sitting there molesting the poster of George W. Bush. Yeah, that's the kind of thing that exists. It's a cult-like mentality, and the Republicans back then, just as they did during Reagan, used the culture war to divide people, and they acted like they were for the average American. Bullshit. Now, again, fuck the Democrats. Bill Clinton, Democratic Leadership Council. Democrats are wimps. Democrats are worthless because they're just the other right-wing party, just maybe slightly less crazy. So that's basically it. But I will resent George W. Bush more than any other president in this country. Sad to say that Obama and Trump, even Trump and Biden were a marginal eyelash blink of an improvement, which ain't saying much. It isn't saying much. And they still fucking sucks. All right. So after George W. Bush, we have Barack Obama, who did basically a repeat of Bill Clinton's presidency. And then in 2016, after Hillary Clinton lost because she was not a likable person, what happened? You ended up with the Orange Man, the Cheeto himself. You want to know why Donald Trump got elected in 2016? Yeah, he said some awful things and running for president. He's always saying awful things because Donald Trump runs his mouth and he doesn't even believe half the shit he says. But he knows what a bunch of dumbasses that the right-wing base is sometimes. And so he knows what to say that will get him like, oh, he's our guy. I mean, there were actually never Trumper Republicans that did not like him because they thought he was not conservative enough. There were those types back then. I remember that, and it's hard to believe, but that was a thing back then too. But getting back to what I'm saying, weirdly enough, he was more moderate than, in spite of how loud he was and how Dr. Evil level goofy silly he is. He was actually more socially moderate than George W. Bush or Ronald Reagan, on policy. Things like the First Step Act, things like that. And, you had Ben Shapiro that got angry with Trump because Trump decided not to go and do a low-scale invasion of Iran that his generals and military advisors said would cost basically anywhere from 150 to 200 lives over an unmanned drone that was blown up by Iran. And so, people like Ben Shapiro thought he was being too passive on that issue, whatever. He made up for it by killing Qasem Soleimani, Donald Trump, in the year 2020, which that puts him in war criminal category, just like George W. Bush. And Bill Clinton's a war criminal too, so is Barack Obama. So we got perpetual war criminals in the White House. We got one now. Look what's going on in Ukraine with Joe Biden. So anyway, the culture war continue under Donald Trump. This is the one that really got me because, to some people, they just think he's the second coming of Christ, and he's a deeply religious man, but a man of God. I mean, I'm like, Donald Trump, hated Barack Obama because you thought he was a secret Muslim or you thought he was an atheist, but you love Donald Trump, who's probably those who said that Barack Obama might be a secret atheist, and this is not an insult, but I could see where he probably isn't all that religious, okay? And Donald Trump is the same way. If I have to say anything, they both have that in common. So, but Donald Trump, used culture war in the 2020 with some aspects of this coronavirus that broke out and things of that nature. It was the culture war all over again. And the January 6th lunatics that, I laughed when it happened, when January 6th took place. I laughed when it happened because those were clowns and they're not going to be able to take over the government. But the fact that they walk around denying reality. Hey, I don't like Joe Biden either, but my reasons are more intelligent than theirs. I don't like Joe Biden because Joe Biden is basically Mitt Romney on policy. They don't like Joe Biden because they think he's Che Guevara. That's the difference, I mean, and I can't believe that there are people out there that they believe that Joe Biden's some revolutionary or what have you. And I'm gonna tell y'all something. Donald Trump is a charlatan and he's a fraud. I mean, he's a comedian about it, but funny. But he's not a populist like people claim to be. He's not a populist at all. So let's see here, and we're gonna go with this motherfucker, Ron DeSantis, who may be who may be a formidable challenger to Donald Trump in this upcoming primaries. And I'm going to argue that when I hear people say that he's a populist, again, they're using the culture war to define populism. There is nothing populist about this war criminal, a man who took delight in engaging in torture in Guantanamo Bay when he was a U.S. naval attorney, JAGS in the mid 2000s. This guy here is a neoconservative when it comes to foreign policy, on the level of someone like Dick Cheney, on the level of someone like John Bolton, on the level of someone like George W. Bush, on the level of someone like Mike Pompeo. This is the kind of person he is. And honestly, you know he's to the right of Trump when you have people like Glenn Beck and people like Matt Walsh and Michael Knowles and Ben Shapiro jumping ship to support them, and Fox News going back to the way they were 20 years ago, as obnoxious as they are today. They gotten very obnoxious lately. They were moderating, believe it or not, for a few years, but they gotten obnoxious again. And part of the reason they got obnoxious again is because of someone like Ron DeSantis, because Ron DeSantis gives the Republicans everything they want that they hate about Trump. They get all the shitty policies that happened under Bush and Cheney that they want back, but they also get the scary orange man. Oh, he's scary thing from Ron DeSantis, but you don't get a comedy show out of him. I had made the comparison. I said that Donald Trump is Dr. Evil from Austin Powers, and this guy Ron DeSantis is basically Mike Myers from Halloween. He's a dangerous man. He is a dangerous man. He is a dangerous man. Make no mistake, he's a dangerous man. He's fundamentally anti-free speech, and his so-called what Florida's where woke dies is a right-wing variation of woke that he has. He even has he's authoritarian across the board. His attacks on Disney has nothing to do with the treatment of workers or whatever. It's because they are like, they were upset with his anti-LGBTQ sentiment. Now, I hate to bring the subject of LGBTQ a lot, but these people are obsessed with it. The Don't Say Gay bill. And what makes him worse than George W. Bush, that when 9/11 happened, at least George W. Bush had just a little bit of tact and said, whether he meant it or not, he said, this is not about Islam, blah, 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 blah. He did use a little bit of tact. This guy doesn't. He wants to make it sound like that everybody who's LGBTQ are all grooming children and everything. And there are going to be people that are going to get seriously harmed because of people like that, like this. And people like Ron DeSantis is going to be the reason why there's going to be a lot of bad things happening. And so I will worry about this guy. This is the Augusto Pinochet of today. And he is not for the people. He's for his crony capitalist buddies on Wall Street. He is for the evangelical Christian right. And he is for the foreign policy warmongering neocons and military industrial complex type. He is exactly a throwback to what is wrong with the Republican Party, a kind of throwback that we haven't seen since Ronald Reagan and George W. Bush. So when they say that the right wing are all pro-worker and everything, I like to know where they stand on the unions. All they do is talk about how they can go and destroy the unions. And then they'll say, well, we're not saying destroy the union. We just say nobody in the public sector should join a union. I dismiss anybody who says that to me, because when they say that to me, that means they want to destroy the unions. Because you get rid of the public sector unions across the country, you're going to get rid of half of the workforce that belongs to the unions. We're talking about unions are like 12% of the workforce right now, 12%. And then you get rid of 5% of the workforce that belongs to unions that work for the government. You're going to get it down to like 6%. You might as well just say, I want to ban unions. So when people say no public sector unions, fuck off, all of y'all, fuck off. And he's not going to do. Here's a Ron DeSantis solution to healthcare. Have money to pay for it or die. That's the solution. What's the solution to foreign policy? More neocon wars, which you're going to see, and believe me, the worst thing domestically Biden did that got reversed, thankfully, was his attempt to do the Governance Disinformation Board, which basically is the Ministry of Truth. And don't think that someone like Ron DeSantis wouldn't be in favor of that. He is as authoritarian as they can be. He is one of the most authoritarian people around. Trump is incompetent. This guy is competent. Trump is goofy and silly. This guy is not. This guy does not provide comedy shows. This guy is a normie. He knows the institutions, and he is far, far, far more dangerous, and he will enable the Marjorie Taylor Greens of the world more than y'all will ever know if this man is elected as president. Fuck you, Ron DeSantis. So anyway, if you like what you heard, press like and comment. Comment any way you disagree with what I have to say. Feel free to share the content on this channel. As a First Amendment absolutist, it's my duty to inform you to create your own platform and utilize it, because we are, in fact, the muckrakers of our time. Also, remember to always reject corporate media because they have nothing to offer. I will, around noon today, have Thomas Salisbury from Tommy Nation Politics as the guest on the show. So drop on by. I hope you'll drop on by and say hi to Thomas and all that. So always good having him on the show. So anyway, always reject corporate media, as I said, folks. And until next time, I am Willy Bragg, and I will talk to you all later. I was going to do a third video, but I think I'm going to go and delay that video for a while, because maybe tomorrow, because I am tired. So take care, y'all. I'll talk to y'all later.